I'd very much like to now welcome James Brokenshire from the Home Office. James Brokenshire is the Minister for Welfare Reform. Thank you very much, James.
Well, thank you very much, and it gives me great pleasure to speak to you today at the launch of Fraud, Error and Debt Programme of activity across central government. And in many ways, I want to reflect some of the comments and themes that Francis has so clearly enunciated in his presentation, and to highlight the strides we are taking in the government's drive to tackle fraud across the whole of UK PLC. I'm particularly pleased to have the opportunity to speak to both colleagues in government and partners from the private sector about counter-fraud initiatives being developed to combat fraud in the public, private and voluntary sectors. And let me say at this outset, fraud is a crime. A serious crime. It's a crime that impacts upon all of us. It pervades every aspect of modern society, from false insurance claims, identity theft, to falsely collecting for charity or false benefits claims. And fraud is never a victimless crime. The overall measure suggests that each and every one of us lose an average of £741, either directly as a victim or indirectly through increases in insurance payments or loss of public and private services. And the other consequences are immense. The criminal proceeds of fraud finance terrorism. It produces funds for serious and organised crime, human trafficking and drugs. There are three strong messages I want to get across to everyone today. Firstly, to underline the seriousness of fraud to the UK economy. The annual fraud indicator produced by the National Fraud Authority estimates that fraud costs £38 billion a year, with 55% of that being suffered by the public sector. However, much remains unreported or undetected. Secondly, that fraud reduces resources from service delivery. Every pound stolen by fraudsters is a pound less for frontline services and supporting the vulnerable in our society. And at a time when government has to make tough decisions on spending, fraud cannot be tolerated. And thirdly, that there are substantial savings to be achieved if we all make use of proven prevention techniques. Now, I'm pleased that the Home Office, side by side with the Cabinet Office, is taking a lead in establishing a strong counter-fraud culture across central government. My department has been working with the National Fraud Authority to develop e-learning and other fraud awareness tools that will shortly be rolled out to every government department. The most important resource in preventing fraud, however, is you. Hard-working public sector workers can limit the impact of fraud by adopting a zero-tolerance approach. Using the tools that have been developed, and there's a workshop on these later in the day at today's session, we can minimise the risk of fraud occurring and make sure every penny of public money is spent on the right things. It's not for government to dictate, interfere, to set targets and to tell everybody what to do, but it is vital that we lead by example. The Home Office will be the first government department to assess levels of staff fraud awareness and will ensure that all staff have undergone the online training to help them to understand, identify and report fraud effectively. As the public sector, we're all required to act honestly and with integrity to safeguard the public finances for which we are responsible. Fraud and corruption at any level will not be tolerated in the public sector, and identified cases will be investigated thoroughly. Now, as Crime and Security Minister for the Home Office, I have the privilege to have close links to the organisations that have key roles in leading the fight against fraud. The National Fraud Authority, the Serious Organised Crime Agency, and the Police Service will all work together more effectively with the creation of the National Crime Agency. This will improve the sharing and use of fraud intelligence, increasing the effectiveness of the law enforcement response with increased emphasis on prevention. The National Crime Agency will be a powerful new body of operational crime fighters that will build on the intelligence, analytical and enforcement capabilities of SOCA, but better connected with the police service and other criminal justice partners. The NCA will be responsible for, among other things, improving what we know about the threat from serious, organised and complex crime, providing effective national tasking and coordination of arrangements, and ensuring that more enforcement activity takes place against more serious and organised criminals at reduced cost, increasing the risk to fraudsters through greater disruption and punishment. We've already established the Economic Crime Coordination Board so that early progress can be made in advance of the formal establishment of the National Crime Agency. This will bring together government, law enforcement, private and voluntary sectors to direct operational and preventative activity connected to economic crime. Now, the government, working closely with all its partners, is determined to reduce and punish fraud wherever it takes place. In October last year, I launched a major new counter-fraud initiative, Fighting Fraud Together, the strategic plan to reduce fraud. And the aim of Fighting Fraud Together is to ensure that by 2015, our country will be demonstrably more resilient to and less damaged by fraud. Fighting Fraud Together is the overarching strategic approach to fighting fraud across the economy, uniting the public and private and not-for-profit sectors in a collaborative approach. Underneath the national strategy, there will be bespoke strategies that address the specific fraud threats in each sector. The first of these, eliminating public sector fraud, outlined the government's approach to tackling the unacceptable levels of fraud across central government. And later on, I'll be highlighting a more local initiative which complements the cross-government strategy and is one of the first deliverables under Fighting Fraud Together. Now, the three key objectives of Fighting Fraud Together are awareness, prevention and enforcement. And it's important that this is not a government or law enforcement strategy, but has been developed in partnership with individuals, businesses, public and voluntary bodies following wide consultation. So far, 37 organisations have signed up, representing all sectors, public, private, voluntary, regulators and law enforcement. And as the process gains momentum, new partners will join and new initiatives will be created. And by drawing upon the combined experience and knowledge of this diverse partnership, a strategic plan has been created with common aims and objectives agreed by key partners. It's underpinned by a comprehensive programme of cross-cutting projects and initiatives that will deliver strong action across the entire counter-fraud landscape. And as Francis said, information sharing is a key weapon in our collective armoury. Whilst great strides have been taken in this area, there is still so much more that can be done to prevent and disrupt fraud. Another area where robust partnerships are being developed in the fight against fraud is with local authorities. According to the annual fraud indicator, local government is thought to be suffering around £2 billion of fraud annually. Our response is the new Fighting Fraud Locally, which will be published shortly. Now, just as Fighting Fraud Together is a strategy developed by all sectors, Fighting Fraud Locally has been developed by local government, for local government with the assistance of the NFA and other key partners. And there are three pillars in this strategy: acknowledge, prevent, and pursue. The first pillar is acknowledging the fraud problem. It means persuading members, chief executives, treasurers, and auditors that fraud is wider than benefit fraud alone, and that there are substantial savings to be realized. The second pillar is preventing fraud. Affordable and cost-effective solutions are available, for example, by using modern data analytical tools with internally held information and input from credit reference agencies. And the third pillar concerns strengthening the law enforcement response by forging closer links with police and other law enforcement agencies to gain support for action against fraudsters. This strategy also calls for a comprehensive partnership between local and central government to fight fraud locally, creating enduring and closer working partnerships to share best practice and share information and intelligence to reduce fraud is absolutely vital to this. And of course, fraudsters don't only target sectors or institutions. They seek to take advantage of major events and opportunities. The 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games will be targeted by organised criminals and opportunistic fraudsters. Our response to London 2012 is making it a safe and secure event has been, I think, really, really important. It's had to be different because of the range of opportunities that are presented to criminals to make money. The opportunities range from construction fraud to ticketing scams to cybercrime to a wide variety of frauds associated with the travel and recruitment industries. In response to these challenges, the Metropolitan Police set up a dedicated Olympic team to combat the economic threat to the Games. The Home Office-funded unit even has an Olympic-related name, Operation Podium. And at its very heart is proactive prevention. And sometimes the word prevention alone has a rather passive tone, but used with proactive invokes a sense of getting on the front foot, actively seeking out partnerships and being creative and willing to try things differently. In the early stages, Podium placed experienced detectives within the procurement and tendering department of the Olympic Delivery Authority to act as a sounding board for fraud prevention and awareness ideas. Specialist Olympic industry forums that include construction, hotel, travel, and ticketing businesses have been formed to share knowledge and expertise so that they can help each other and protect us. You may have also seen activity reported in the media relating to the arrest of criminals, organising ticketing frauds, and the disruption of websites offering tickets. Identifying vulnerabilities and designing them out with technical experts is, of course, an essential requirement to prevent fraud. But of equal importance is the need to take preemptive action against criminals who have the means, capability, and desire to exploit the Games. Since June 2010, Operation Podium has made 97 arrests across the whole of this remit, including the proactive targeting of ticketing fraudsters. We know that one of the key things that distinguished the London 2012 bid was the commitment to an enduring legacy from the Games. Now, we tend to think of that in terms of stadia, housing, and a more active sporting population. And there is already a great repository of influence on the approach to fraud prevention in the Olympics. That and the working partnerships with industry that have been established are also important legacies, and we must make sure that these are passed on when the Games are over. And fraud impacts across all business sectors and across our society. We need to ensure that we have the best possible structures and processes in place to tackle the full range of fraud at local, national, and international levels. The responsibility for that does not lie with one agency or sector or government. It falls to all of us. An effective counter-fraud response demands the continued efforts and cooperation of individuals working across a range of sectors, organisations, local authorities, and government departments. Those who commit fraud cannot be allowed to continue causing damage at so many levels. The priority for us all here today is to work closer together to make fraud harder to commit, easier to identify, and to bring the fraudsters to justice. Only through our joint efforts across government, working in close partnership with the private sector, charities and trade associations, will we be able to tackle the fraud that confronts our country. And this close partnership is vital to the success of fighting fraud together, fighting fraud locally, and the other initiatives you will be leading within your organisations. And I can give you this commitment that the Home Office will be an exemplar organisation for fighting fraud. We will take our responsibility as the lead department on fraud very, very seriously. This is why we have placed economic crime at the heart of the National Crime Agency. It's why, through the NFA, we lead the cross-sector work in fighting fraud together, and why we stand ready to be an example of best practice in combating fraud risks within our own departments. My ministerial colleagues and I are committed to ensuring that this message is clearly understood. Everyone responsible for handling public money has a duty that there will be zero tolerance to those committing fraud, whether they are members of the public, suppliers and contractors, or even our own colleagues. And my final message is that to deal with fraud effectively, we must continue to work together. Your presence here is a powerful symbol of the progress we have made in the last 18 months. I am confident that we can and we will do just that. Thank you very much.